Australia have broken the Lionesses' 30-game unbeaten streak after defeating them at home 2-0. So, let's talk about it. Today is exactly 100 days away from the Women's World Cup kicking off. It is also the day that the April window is wrapping up with some absolutely crazy games that took place, some very, very fun ones, crazy results. But probably the biggest and the craziest one of them all was Australia beating England 2-0. This comes as the first loss under Sarina Wiegman. It is also the first time that they have conceded 2 goals under Sarina Wiegman. And actually, this is the first time since 2021 that they have lost to a 2-goal deficit. So a lot of firsts and a lot of unpleasant firsts taking place for the Lionesses today. But I actually think a lot of these firsts is very important experience to take into the World Cup. Obviously, there's no more international windows or friendlies to take place from now on to the World Cup. There might be a lot of behind-the-door exhibitions, behind-the-door friendlies. That's likely going to happen, but nothing, big or massive before the World Cup kicks off. And in my head, I found it quite troubling that this team is going to a World Cup where they've never been defeated before. One, troubling because that's just a ridiculous stat to go into a World Cup for, but two, it means that maybe you haven't been tested to the measures that you needed to be tested for. What I mean by that is that since Sarina Wiegman has been working with the Lionesses, not a single Lionesses player has been able to wake up after a loss and go into the office and know what happens in a training camp after a loss. They've had very close ties. They've had some very, very close wins as well that they were trailing behind during the game. But none of these players have woken up or have had to feel a loss as a collective together. Obviously, plenty of these players experience losses on club level week in and week out. But as this group, as this collective, as this training staff together, have they experienced a loss before? And no, they haven't. Is that players meeting going to look a little bit differently? Is there changes going to happen for the agenda or changes that are going to happen for the goals? There's a lot of things that a lot of these players haven't been able to go through with this specific staff. I think players need to be aware of that. Players need to experience that. And I think that will help you rebound. That next period after a loss is what could actually make you better, could actually make you stronger. It's the rebound. I'm going to be a little bit cliche here, but it's not how hard you fall, it's how hard you get up. And this right now exactly is what the Lionesses needed. On the field, that first 45 minutes to me was probably the most underwhelming first half that England has played so far. That second half as well, there was spells of momentum, but nothing really to shake up Australia. Nothing really, if anything, it actually looked like the momentum was going towards Australia more than England. The midfield looked disconnected. The front three was not so dynamic, not as dynamic as we're used to seeing them. They were always facing the movement. There was no explosion of going towards the movement. They were almost just watching it happen and watching it play and reacting if it comes to them rather than going to it. There was no stretching movement. Usually that is exactly what causes a lot of opposition trouble. None of that was happening. Australia was brilliant in being so well organized today. They were the one being explosive. They were managing the play. They were not just facing it. If they didn't have it on them, they were going and grabbing that ball. They were fighting for it. Super dangerous on the counter. Super fast. That front three, super dynamic. They did lack that final pass here and there. They kind of just needed to finish the ball. But it was a very dangerous counter that I don't think the England defense was able to deal with them as well as they needed to. You could hear the Australian players talking to each other. They're loud, they're communicative, and that's exactly what you need to do when you want to maintain a very organized side for 90 straight minutes. Something that Australia is really going to be happy to take on from this game is that how well they locked that midfield. In their World Cup group, they've got Nigeria, who, if you don't know or if you don't watch Nigeria, they've got some of the most aggressive midfield that's just so dynamic, so fast, so just it's going to come at you. And if you're able to lock midfields the way that you did today, I think Australia's going to be really happy to look at that and be like, you know what, against a team like Nigeria in the World Cup, we're going to be looking at some very positive outcomes for us. Also in their group is Ireland. Ireland occasionally like to have 5 in the back. If you're fast on the counter and if you're super explosive like they were, again, that's another massive lesson to take. So this game for Australia, I thought, was super great because it covered a lot of areas against the teams that they are being matched up with at the World Cup. For England, they need to sort out what happened that they weren't able to react. They weren't able to break down the organization of Australia. Why did they just lack any creativity? They looked asleep. You could see Sarina Wiegman telling them to wake up, but there was no wake up call. You had multiple wake up calls, but there was no reaction from any of the players, I didn't think. When Daly came on, she was more in of a midfield position. I didn't quite understand that. You actually would want to throw her in that striker position, just launch balls at her or have her in a fullback position, but just definitely not in the midfield. those substitutions came on way too late. You wanted to give Australia a bit of a new challenge, right? They had clearly figured you out for a good amount of the game. You wanted to throw at them this new player, new challenge, new fresh pair of legs, mix up the player a little bit. Those subs needed to be impact subs. You bring them in a little bit earlier. Maybe they can wake up the creativity a little bit. Maybe they can fuel some of these stretching plays that you're usually known to do. So that was a little bit out of character by Sarina, not switching to 4-4-2, putting Daly in the middle. Substitutions coming a little bit too late. Maybe not the right substitutions. I'm not sure if I can put my finger on it, but definitely out of character and definitely things to take into the World Cup. Again, maybe I switched into this formation. It's not working. What didn't work? What needs to change? There has been a talking point of England missing the leadership roles of Millie Bright and the qualities of Alex Greenwood, but I think you can definitely do the same conversation for Australia. They're missing Catley, who has the exact same international caps as Millie Bright. So if you're talking experience and leadership, Steph Catley is an important face for Australia. Alana Kennedy, another experienced player in the back. Caitlin Ford, another very important player to the program and has been for the last decade. And so Australia's coming in also very hindered. So both teams are coming in with missing players. A lot of these missing players play the exact same positions. Again, Greenwood and Millie Bright, very similar to Kennedy and Steph Catley. Beth Mead and Caitlin Ford, very similar positions. And so, but again, this is another thing that England needed. Millie Bright has been played for so many games that it was almost inevitable that she was going to catch an injury. I mean, the amount of games and the amount of minutes that she's been racking up is just it's insane. You'd rather her take a break now than like say in the middle of the World Cup where now you're like, oh crap, we don't have Millie Bright, what do we do? So no, it's good they're going through these lessons to figure it out from now. She found out Leah Williamson, Esme Morgan is probably not the pairing, but again, you had to try it out now so that if things were to become thin and if that roster was to become thin in the World Cup, you know what you can adjust. Like I mentioned before, this is the first time that they have conceded 2 goals under Sarina Wiegman. So now they're going to maybe put in a little bit more focus in the back. What went wrong? Obviously, that first goal was a bit of a misheaded ball from Leah Williamson. If you watch the replay, it might look like Sam Kerr's offside, but because Leah Williamson got contact of the ball before it got to Sam Kerr, there's no need of a VAR review. There's no VAR available at the game anyway, but it's not an offside anymore because Leah Williamson got touched to it. So let's put that conversation to rest. Second goal, also very brilliant. Grant getting her first goal for Australia. I mean, what an opposition to do it against. And what a header. I mean, that was so powerful. Kudos. So the main takeaway, Australia are looking very good. I think Gustafsson has to be given some credit for the progress that he's done with Australia. He is a great coach. This was a great appointment from the start to begin with, especially after the era of what was happening before he came into to position. In some ways, I think Australia has actually been quite unlucky because every time they go on camp, they have some important players missing, and I don't think so far they've had a fully complete fit camp. Only now have they just gone Ellie Carpenter, so I cannot remember of a full camp that Australia had every single player that they needed and every single player that is probably going to go to the World Cup. They take on some great lessons, ones that are going to be very important for that group stage of the World Cup. For England, even more important lessons. You needed to lose. You needed to kind of get brought down to the feeling of a loss. If they have another bad day in the office in the group stages and you are really heavily counting on that last game of the group stages, you need to know how to rebound from a loss. I mean, literally imagine they lose one of the first 2 games in the group stages. They need to greatly, massively rebound in the third game, and they've never lost a game before. I mean, that would make sense, and you would have a lot of doubts on how they would react. Lessons to look at substitutions. Like I mentioned in the previous video, a big talking point is that the team is not exactly the same team as the one in the Euros. You're not bringing on Alessia Russo and Toon off the bench, but rather now you're starting them every single game. Maybe that needs to be looked at. Maybe Beth England. I mean, something to consider as well, because Beth Mead's out. The player selection, I'm not saying is completely perfect or is absolutely abysmal, but definitely things like that make you reflect and make you look at the possible players and substitutions that you need to be considering for the World Cup. I want to hear your opinions on this. I mean, how impressed were you with Australia? You have to give them credit where credit is due. How disappointed were you by England? Looked very, very bored. It's almost like they didn't want to be there. They were just looking at the ball, not going towards it, not exploding. What went wrong? Is it just what happened? As always, to stay updated and to continue enjoying the beautiful game, make sure you subscribe to me here on YouTube, follow me on Twitter, and make sure you follow me on Spotify and Apple Music to listen to all of these podcasts for free. And I will see you later.